In 1989, one of the world's biggest soft drink companies quietly became a military superpower. For a few surreal months, Pepsi owned 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. Enough firepower to start a small war. And somehow, this was all part of a soda deal with the Soviet Union. Moscow, 1959. Beneath the glass dome of the American National Exhibition, the Cold War plays out in chrome and neon. Two men circle each other through translators and flashing bulbs. Richard Nixon, Vice President of the United States, and Nikita Khrushchev, Premier of the Soviet Union. They argue over kitchens, color TVs, and the very meaning of progress. Then a third figure appears, Donald Kendall, a salesman with a silver tray. On the tray, 2 paper cups, ice, and the dark fizz of Pepsi Cola. Khrushchev takes a sip. Cameras explode in white light. Laughter ripples through the crowd. For one frozen instant, the Iron Curtain dissolves in sugar and carbonation. And with that sip, a soft drink company opens a new front in the Cold War. The man with the tray isn't a diplomat. He's Donald M. Kendall, 38 years old, a salesman with a stubborn grin and the confidence of a prize fighter. In the crowd's chaos, he senses something bigger than a publicity stunt. If the premier of the Soviet Union will drink Pepsi, he'll later boast, then maybe the Soviet Union will too. Overnight, the photograph of Khrushchev sipping Pepsi races across newspapers from Washington to Warsaw. Behind that photo, Kendall begins to plot a campaign, not just for sales, but for history. In a war of ideologies, he will weaponize refreshment. The 1960s. The Soviet Union hums behind closed borders. Dollars are outlawed, imports rationed, and Western advertising is treated like subversion. But in Moscow's cafes and workers' dorms, one photograph keeps resurfacing. The Soviet premier tasting an American soda. To ordinary citizens, it becomes mythic, the flavor of the forbidden world. To Donald Kendall, it's unfinished business. He imagines Pepsi bottles stacked in red square kiosks, the brand bridging an empire. Yet there's a problem no marketing plan can solve. Rubles mean nothing outside the USSR. If he wants Pepsi behind the Iron Curtain, he needs something the Soviets can trade. Kendall's answer: vodka for cola, sugar for spirits, bubbles for fire. A deal so strange it might just work. 1972. After nearly a decade of quiet back-channel meetings and bureaucratic chess, the impossible happens. In a smoke-filled boardroom in Moscow, Donald Kendall signs a contract with the Soviet Foreign Trade Ministry. For the first time, an American consumer product will be legally manufactured and sold inside the USSR. But there's no cash on the table, only crates of Stolichnaya vodka. The USSR will pay for Pepsi and spirits. The US will buy the vodka and sell it abroad. It's barter on a geopolitical scale, soda for liquor, capitalism for communism. As pens scratch paper and flashbulbs pop, Kendall smiles. He's not just selling cola, he's bottling détente. By the late 1970s, Pepsi is everywhere in the Soviet Union, in cafes, workers' canteens, and the dim lounges of in-tourist hotels. To the West, it looks like a triumph of marketing. To Soviet citizens, it tastes like another planet. A bottle of Pepsi costs half a day's wage. An empty glass is worth money on the black market. Teenagers polish them, keep them on shelves, proof that they've touched the outside world. Soviet television airs glowing reels of bottling plants and smiling workers. Yet behind the smiles sits an irony. A capitalist icon thriving inside a communist state. Every fizzing bottle is a quiet contradiction. The sound of ideology losing its edge. For a moment, sugar and bubbles succeed where diplomats have failed. The 1980s, the Soviet economy is breaking under its own weight. Oil revenues fall, debts climb, and store shelves grow bare. Yet even in crisis, the taste for Pepsi lingers. For more than a decade, the company has traded cola for vodka, but now even vodka can't keep the balance. The ruble is worthless abroad, and the USSR is desperate for Western goods. When officials approached Pepsi in 1989 to renew their deal, Kendall's successors face a question no economist could have predicted. What do you give a soft drink company when you've run out of money and vodka? The answer will soon stun the world. Ships. The offer sounds impossible. Instead of cash or vodka, the Soviet Union proposes to pay Pepsi in military hardware. 17 submarines, a cruiser, a destroyer, a frigate, all decommissioned, or so the paperwork says. On paper, it's barter. The Soviets need Pepsi concentrate. Pepsi needs something of value. In practice, it's surreal. For a few months in 1989, a soft drink company quietly owns one of the largest fleets on Earth. Somewhere in the Arctic, gray hulls rust in silence, waiting for scrap buyers who can turn steel into cash, and cash into syrup. The Cold War's strangest trade is sealed with a corporate signature. The news leaks slowly. A reporter from a trade journal uncovers a bizarre line in a maritime registry. PepsiCo Incorporated, owner. The cargo, 17 submarines, a cruiser, a destroyer, and a frigate. Within days, headlines shout, Pepsi buys the Soviet Navy. In Washington, State Department aides choke on their coffee. In Moscow, the story is half denied, half laughed off. Donald Kendall jokes to US officials, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." For a surreal summer in 1989, Pepsi is a naval superpower, a corporation with more warships than most countries. And as scrap metal dealers circle like sharks, the irony is complete. The Cold War's fiercest weapons have been traded for cola syrup. The deal never gives Pepsi control of the vessels themselves. The company isn't sailing submarines across the Atlantic. Instead, it contracts a Norwegian scrap firm to dismantle them, sell the steel, and turn the proceeds into dollars. But timing is everything. In 1991, before all the payments are even settled, the Soviet Union collapses. The ruble implodes, borders shift, new flags rise overnight. The Pepsi fleet becomes a ghost, part legend, part balance sheet. For a brief, absurd moment, capitalism literally bought the weapons of communism. And as the empire that built them vanishes, so does the deal that made them valuable. When the dust settles, the Soviet Union is gone. The ships have been sold for scrap, the rubles are worthless, and Pepsi's once secret navy is only a punchline. Yet the story never really disappears. In classrooms, in documentaries, and in internet forums decades later, people still ask, did Pepsi really own a navy? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, the paperwork existed. Yes, the ships were real. But the moment was fleeting, a symbol of what the Cold War had become. Commerce outmaneuvering ideology. For Donald Kendall, it was proof that capitalism could adapt to any battlefield, even one built on barter. For history, it's a footnote that tastes like irony, a reminder that empires fall, but brands endure. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the deal fades from corporate ledgers into rumor. Then, in the early 2000s, a strange headline resurfaces online. Remember when Pepsi had a navy? Blogs repeat it, documentaries quote it, memes turn it into a Cold War punchline. Most people never check the details, because the story is too perfect to verify. A soda company buying warships from a collapsing superpower? It sounds like satire written by history itself. In an era obsessed with branding, the myth becomes the brand. Beneath the humor lies something serious. The Pepsi-Soviet barter wasn't a curiosity, it was a prophecy. It foreshadowed a world where corporations negotiate with nations, where influence flows through supply chains instead of armies. In the 1960s, it was cola for vodka. In the 2020s, it's data for attention, chips for power, and brands for loyalty. Pepsi's navy may have rusted away, but the kind of empire it represented, one built on taste, image, and access, now spans the globe. In the end, the Pepsi Navy was never about ships. It was about imagination. How far business would go when politics stopped moving. A drink crossed an ocean. A brand crossed an empire. And for one absurd heartbeat, the world's great ideological war was reduced to a trade of bubbles for steel. History remembered it as a joke. But in that joke lies a warning. Whoever controls desire controls the world. The Cold War ended. The thirst didn't.